With me now is the top Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee, also a member of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Jim Risch of Idaho. Senator, thank you for joining me. So let's talk about President Biden's unified front that he said, and the ambassador said, was presented with NATO allies. He pledged for more help to Ukraine. The U.S. unveiled a new plan with the EU to move Europe away from Russian oil and gas. So was the president's trip to NATO a success?
You know, Dan, I really think he did need to be there and help manage the relationship. Look, we're fortunate to have a good ambassador there that you just had on, Ambassador Smith. Her predecessor, Kay Bailey Hutchison, did a good job. That's a complex relationship when you're dealing with 30 countries and trying to bring them all together. It was important that the president go there. He gave a good speech at the end. But as you've pointed out already, there was a horrendous gaffe right at the end of it. I wish he would stay on script. Whoever wrote that speech did a good job for him. But my gosh, I wish they would keep him on script. I think most people who don't deal in the lane of foreign relations don't realize that those 9 words that he uttered would cause the kind of eruption that they did. But anytime you say, or even as he did, suggest that the policy was regime change, it's going to cause a huge problem. This administration has done everything they can to stop escalating. There's not a whole lot more you can do to escalate than to call for regime change. So look, the White House tried to walk it back immediately. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, tried to walk it back immediately. I'll walk it back right now. That is not the policy of the United States of America. Please, Mr. President, stay on script.
You said for those who are not familiar with the way foreign policy works, they don't understand how big of a deal it is. Can you enlighten people? Can you explain why you think it was so bad and what the ramifications could be?
Well, I think I don't need to do that as much as everybody who listened to it's done that. You've seen the stories that have come up all over the world because that was a announcement of a change in policy. Regime change is something that is existential. I mean, you just don't do that. And the suggestion was made that we were changing policy and going to regime change. That is not the policy of the United States, and that was not in the speech, as you know. That was an ad lib of his at the end of what was a good speech, and whoever wrote it did a good job, hit the right notes, and then to have that at the end, the sour note at the end, was unfortunate, to say the least.
Yeah, and as you just heard from the ambassador, it is not the U.S. policy, the administration policy for regime change, and the White House did try to walk it back moments after the president ad-libbed that. I want to ask about what's going on the battlefield. Russia claims it is moving toward a more limited mission, only focused on the Donbass region. President Biden said yesterday that he isn't sure Russia has really changed its strategy. You're not only the top Republican on foreign relations, you're also on the Intelligence Committee. So what are you seeing? What do you believe?
Well, I think the jury's out on that. You can't believe anything they say. So I don't put any stock in the fact that they're announcing that they're changing policy. But look, they're losing this war. And if anybody who's involved in operating it obviously needs to change direction, or the whole thing's going to fall out from underneath them. So I'm not surprised to hear them say they're going to do something different. You can just keep pounding, trying to pound a square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't work. And that's what they've been trying to do day after day. It's not working, and things are getting more dire for at home in Russia. So I'm not surprised to see them announcing something, and I won't be surprised to see them try something differently. Look, how resolute the Ukrainian people have been is just awesome. I mean, it's awe-inspiring. They're doing what our patriots did in 1776. They're fighting not only for their future, for their kids, for their grandkids. They're trying to pass a gift off to the next generations of the Ukrainians that is invaluable. So they're committed to it. The Russians have found out how committed they are to it, and it has been incredibly costly for the Russians at this point.
President Biden said this week that the decision about whether to cede Donbass to Russia is up to Ukraine. But he said, I don't believe that they're going to have to do that. Ukraine, as I'm sure you've seen, they rejected the idea so far. But is that something that should be considered to end the war, give up that region on the eastern front of Ukraine to Russia, if that would be something that Russia would accept?
Look, there's been upheaval there for 8 years, as you know. There's been a civil war, essentially, in the two regions that make up the Donbass. That's not for us to decide. That's for President Zelensky and his fellow Ukrainians to decide what they have to do to make peace and what they have to do to regulate their country. They've got two problems there, of course. They got the Donbass, and they also have the Crimea. Those are both issues that they're going to have to decide what they're willing to do to take them back. Frankly, with the success they're having, I wouldn't be surprised if they say, no, we're not going to give it back. It's part of Ukraine, and we're going to defend it and go forward with that. I don't know what the Russians will do, but if they do fall back there, they'll have a better time defending that particular area. But those are decisions to be made by them on the ground there.
President Biden did not rule out a military response to a chemical weapon attack in Ukraine. He said we'd make that decision at the time. How do you think the U.S. and NATO, of course, should respond if Russia does use chemical weapons?
Well, look, there's four game changers here that could happen. Number one, if the Russians tried to trespass on 1 square inch of NATO ground, obviously chemical weapons, biological weapons, or nuclear weapons, all four of those would be game changers. I think that if Russia does that, there's going to be some very difficult decisions that are going to have to be made by the NATO alliance, by the 30 countries that make up NATO. Look, we're civilized human beings living in the 21st century. There was a horrendous mistake made in Syria when chemical weapons were used after the red line had been laid down, and then really nothing happened. There was no response to it. Something's going to have to be done, and it's going to have to be very significant. One would hope, one would pray that the Russians would not make what would be a catastrophic mistake.
Senator, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask, we talked on this show 2 months ago. You were on with the Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, and you were both optimistic that Congress could pass a bipartisan bill to impose sanctions. You didn't, and of course the administration has since imposed a lot of sanctions on its own. Is there something more that you want Congress to do?
Yeah, well, I would like to see, as both Bob and I talked about at that time, we'd like to see more sanctions. From my standpoint, I'd like to see secondary sanctions on every bank in Russia. I think that with what's going on there, we really can't be too tough on sanctions. We just really need to bring the hammer down. So I'd like to see more. The administration, of course, they have control of Congress, and they've been very active in persuading their party not to pass sanctions. They want to do it themselves through the administration. I get that. Every administration wants to be in full control. Obviously, I think Congress plays a role in this. I'd like to see some language passed through Congress. We've struggled with it. We've made a good faith effort, but came very close, but didn't quite get it done. Look, they're putting their sanctions on. The sanctions really have surprised us as far as how effective they've been.
Right.
And I'd encourage them to keep up, heading down that road.
Senator Jim Risch joining me from his home state of Idaho, top Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee. I appreciate your time this morning, sir.
Thank you, Dana. Good to be with you.
Thank you.